The sunlight streamed through the vast windows of LaGuardia Airport as a young Asian American woman stood at the priority boarding gate, her pilot's uniform perfectly pressed and her credentials clearly visible. Despite her professional appearance, the gate agent kept glancing at her with obvious skepticism, repeatedly gesturing toward the regular passenger line. "Ma'am, this line is for flight crew only," the agent said with a hint of condescension. "The economy boarding line is over there." She pointed to a growing queue of passengers near another gate. The pilot took a deep breath, maintaining her composure as she had done countless times before. She'd faced this scenario so often that it almost felt like a familiar dance. "I am the pilot," she stated firmly, holding up her credentials. "I'm here to board my aircraft." The gate agent's eyes widened slightly, but rather than apologizing, she scrutinized the ID badge with exaggerated care. Behind her, several passengers watched the scene unfold, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed smirks. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit pushed forward. "Is there a problem here? I'm running late for my flight." He glanced at the pilot dismissively, clearly sharing the gate agent's assumptions. What nobody knew was that this pilot had spent the last 15 years building her career from the ground up. Her journey had begun in a small apartment above her parents' dry cleaning business in Queens, where aviation magazines were hidden between textbooks, and model airplanes hung from her bedroom ceiling, despite her family's disapproval. As she stood there, memories flooded back of the countless nights spent studying flight manuals, the extra hours logged in simulators, and the string of part-time jobs that helped fund her flight school dreams. Her parents had worked 14-hour days at their shop, saving every penny they could to send her to college, hoping she'd become a doctor or lawyer. The gate agent finally handed back her credentials with reluctant acceptance. "I'll need to verify this with my supervisor," she said, reaching for her phone. Just then, a senior flight operations manager walked past, immediately recognizing the pilot. "Oh good, you're here. The weather report just came in, and we need to discuss the flight path to Silicon Valley. That storm system over the Rockies could be tricky." The faces around her transformed as they witnessed this interaction. The gate agent's phone slowly lowered, and the impatient businessman took a small step back, his expression shifting from annoyance to something that looked remarkably like embarrassment. But this pilot wasn't interested in their reactions anymore. She had a multi-million-dollar private jet to fly and a high-profile client waiting. As she walked confidently toward the tarmac, her mind was already focused on weather patterns and flight plans, leaving behind the small-mindedness that had tried to clip her wings so many times before. Through the terminal windows, passengers watched as she performed her pre-flight checks with meticulous care. Some of the same people who had witnessed the scene at the gate now snapped photos, perhaps finally realizing that excellence doesn't conform to their preconceptions. The roar of the engines drowned out any remaining whispers of doubt. In the cockpit, she was in her element, surrounded by the sophisticated instruments and controls that had become as familiar to her as the steam press in her parents' shop once was. This was her domain, earned through years of persistence, skill, and unwavering determination. As the private jet taxied toward the runway, she allowed herself a small smile. Not because she had proved them wrong. She was long past needing that validation. She smiled because somewhere in that terminal, perhaps another young dreamer was watching her take off, realizing that their own aspirations weren't as impossible as others might have them believe. Would you like me to continue with part 2 of the story? The tiny apartment above the family dry cleaning business buzzed with the usual weekend sounds, the hiss of steam presses below, the chatter of customers, and the quiet sobs of a teenage girl trying to hide her aviation magazines from her disappointed parents. "A pilot? Why do you want to waste your life?" her mother had asked that morning, her voice heavy with concern. "Look at cousin Ming. She's already in medical school. That's a respectable career." The words still echoed in her head hours later as she sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by hidden pamphlets about flight school. The walls of her small bedroom told the story of her dreams. Where other kids had posters of pop stars, she had carefully cut out pictures of aircraft. A detailed model of Boeing 747 hung from her ceiling, slowly spinning in the breeze from a rickety fan. Her desk drawer contained a stack of physics homework mixed with carefully saved articles about women in aviation. Every weekend, she would take the bus to LaGuardia Airport, pressing her nose against the observation deck windows, watching planes take off and land. She kept a small notebook, jotting down aircraft types, flight patterns, and weather conditions. Other kids her age spent their weekends at the mall. She spent hers studying the dance of aircraft against the New York sky. The sound of the shop's bell downstairs would make her jump, quickly hiding her aviation materials under textbooks. Her parents worked 14-hour days, their hands rough from years of pressing clothes, their dreams centered on their daughter becoming a doctor or lawyer. How could she tell them that every pressed shirt, every clean jacket was pushing her toward a different dream? One day, an older customer noticed her watching planes through the shop window while helping at the counter. Instead of picking up his suits, he shared stories about his time as an Air Force mechanic. His eyes lit up as he described the feeling of watching pilots prepare for takeoff, the precise checks, the responsibility, the freedom. That evening, after closing the shop, she gathered her courage and showed her parents her secret savings. Tips from helping in the shop, money from tutoring neighborhood kids in math, even birthday money she'd been squirreling away for years. "I can help pay for flight school," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "I've researched scholarships. I've found programs. Please, just let me try." Her father, usually stern and quiet, studied her face for a long moment. He picked up one of her aviation magazines, flipping through pages filled with her careful notes in the margins. The silence stretched until it felt like it might snap. "You work this hard just to study planes?" he finally asked, pointing to her detailed annotations. She nodded, heart pounding. He exchanged a long look with her mother, years of unspoken dreams and sacrifices passing between them. "My daughter," he said slowly, "wants to fly." It wasn't quite approval, but it wasn't rejection either. It was acknowledgement, the first crack in the wall of their expectations. That night, she heard her parents talking in low voices in the kitchen. Words like dangerous and impossible mixed with determined and smart. Her mother cried a little. Her father talked about his own father, who had crossed an ocean with nothing but hope for a better future. The next morning, her father handed her a small red envelope, a tradition usually reserved for New Year. Inside was enough money for her first flying lesson. "You will work twice as hard," he said firmly. "You will still study for college." But he paused, choosing his words carefully. "If this is your dream, you must prove it's not just a dream." Her mother simply hugged her, whispering in her native tongue, "Show them all what our daughter can do." Those words became her mantra through the years that followed, through every obstacle and doubt, through every person who said she couldn't or shouldn't. That evening, she added a new model to her ceiling, a small private jet, its sleek lines promising a future she could almost touch. Below in the shop, the steam press hissed, her parents' determination pressing out wrinkles in fabric while their daughter prepared to soar above the clouds. Would you like me to continue with part 3 of the story? Flight school turned out to be a world of stark contrasts, where her dreams met reality head-on. Walking into the classroom for the first time, she immediately felt the weight of every stare. Among the 20 students, she was the only woman, and the only Asian face in a sea of expectations that didn't include her. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" the instructor had asked on that first day, checking his roster twice. The question stung, but she'd smiled politely and took her seat in the front row, textbooks already marked with post-it notes from her late-night study sessions. During simulator training, she could hear the whispers. "Probably got in because they needed diversity," someone muttered. She responded by logging extra hours in the simulator, staying long after others had left, repeating maneuvers until they became second nature. The night janitor became her friend, bringing her coffee and sharing stories about his daughter who dreamed of becoming an engineer. The theoretical classes proved to be her sanctuary. Years of struggling with her parents' expectations had made her a master of preparation. While others scrambled to understand aerodynamics principles, she was already 3 chapters ahead. Physics equations that frustrated her classmates made perfect sense to her. They were just another kind of poetry, describing the dance between wind and wing. One particularly challenging day, the chief instructor called her into his office. Her heart pounded, thinking of all the reasons she might be in trouble. Instead, he pointed to her latest test scores. "These are the highest marks I've seen in 15 years of teaching," he said, looking at her with newfound respect. "But theory isn't enough. Are you ready for your first real flight?" That moment in the actual cockpit was everything she dreamed of and more terrifying than she'd imagined. Her hands shook slightly as she went through the pre-flight checklist. Her instructor, an old-school pilot with decades of experience, watched her every move with hawk-like intensity. The engine roared to life under her command, and suddenly all the doubts, all the whispers, all the raised eyebrows disappeared. Up here, the only thing that mattered was skill. The sky didn't care about her gender or her background. It demanded respect and competence from everyone equally. Her first landing was far from perfect. Few are. But as the wheels touched down, her instructor broke into a rare smile. "You have a natural feel for it," he admitted. "But don't let that go to your head. Natural talent is nothing without hard work." She didn't need that reminder. Every evening, while her classmates headed to bars to unwind, she was in the study hall, surrounded by manuals and weather charts. Her parents' sacrifices fueled her determination. Each pressed shirt in their shop represented another hour she could study, another step closer to her goal. The breakthrough came during a surprise evaluation flight. Bad weather had forced other training flights to cancel, but her instructor decided to proceed. Through storms that would have rattled many experienced pilots, she remained focused, her hands steady on the controls. "Sometimes the hardest steel comes from the hottest fire," her instructor said afterward, signing off on her evaluation with the highest marks. Word spread through the school. The same classmates who had doubted her began asking for help with their studies. She remembered her mother's words about helping others climb when you reach the top, so she stayed late many nights, turning the study hall into an informal tutoring center. Graduation day arrived with a mix of triumph and new challenges ahead. As she accepted her certification, standing before the crowd in her crisp white shirt, pressed by her father's own hands, she saw tears in her parents' eyes. They weren't tears of disappointment anymore, but of pride. The chief instructor pulled her aside after the ceremony. "The sky is still mostly a boys' club," he said frankly, "but it's changing, slowly. Pilots like you, the ones who excel despite the odds, you're the ones changing it. Remember that on the hard days ahead." Would you like me to continue with part 4 of the story? Landing a job proved harder than earning her wings. Each morning, she sent out applications from the tiny desk in her childhood bedroom, the model planes above her head now joined by her framed pilot's license. The rejections came just as regularly, each one a paper cut to her dreams. "We're looking for someone with more experience," they'd say, or "our clients have certain expectations." The unspoken words hung in the air like storm clouds. She kept every rejection letter in a folder, not to discourage herself, but as fuel for her determination. Her parents' shop became her office between applications. She'd help press suits while checking her emails, steam dresses while making follow-up calls. Some customers, learning of her qualifications, were amazed. Others made comments that made her grip the iron a little tighter. "A female pilot? Isn't that dangerous?" Then came the breakthrough. A small regional airline needed pilots for their less desirable routes. The pay was modest, the hours brutal, but it was a start. Her first assignment was flying mail runs in the early morning hours, when most people were still dreaming in their beds. The mail route taught her things flight school never could. She learned to read the morning sky's moods, to feel weather changes in her bones, to land on small runways with minimal lighting. Every successful flight added another entry to her logbook, another step toward her bigger dreams. Other pilots avoided holiday shifts, but she volunteered for them all. Thanksgiving. She was in the cockpit. Christmas Eve. Flying through the night like Santa himself. New Year's. Watching fireworks from above while delivering cargo to remote towns. Her dedication caught the attention of senior pilots. One veteran, nearing retirement, started leaving his weather notes for her. "You remind me of myself," he said one dawn as they crossed paths in the break room. "Same hunger in the eyes. But you're better than I was at your age." The real test came during an unexpected storm. She was carrying medical supplies to a small mountain town when the weather turned violent. Other pilots had diverted, but she knew the medication was urgently needed. Drawing on every lesson learned, every hour of simulation, she guided the plane through the turbulence. Ground control later praised her judgment and skill, but she brushed off the compliments. To her, it was simply doing the job right. That night, typing up her flight report in the quiet hours before dawn, she noticed her logbook was getting fuller, her experience growing with each passing month. Passengers started appearing on her flights. First a few, then full planes. Some would do a double take upon seeing her in the cockpit. Others would request different flights. She learned to handle their reactions with professional grace, letting her flying speak for itself. A particular flight stood out. A young girl, perhaps 7 or 8, peered into the cockpit during boarding. Her eyes went wide with wonder. "Mommy, look. Girls can be pilots too." The mother smiled apologetically, but the pilot just winked at the child. That moment reminded her of herself at that age, face pressed against the observation deck windows. Her reputation grew steadily. Other airlines started noticing. The same companies that had rejected her fresh out of flight school now sent recruiting emails. But she remained loyal to the regional airline that had given her first chance, at least until she had enough hours for her next goal. Each night, returning home exhausted but satisfied, she'd look up at the passing private jets overhead. They traced golden paths across the sky, carrying the elite to their destinations. Soon, she'd whisper to herself, just as she had as a teenager in her parents' shop. Her logbook now showed thousands of hours, each entry a step on the ladder she was climbing. The folder of rejection letters gathered dust, replaced by commendations and perfect safety records. She wasn't just surviving in the industry anymore, she was thriving. Would you like me to continue with part 5 of the story? The day-to-day reality of being a female pilot came with its own unique set of challenges. Like the morning when a passenger refused to board after seeing her in the cockpit. He demanded to speak to the real pilot, his face red with misplaced anger. The flight attendants exchanged knowing looks, having seen this scene before. What the passenger didn't know was that just the previous week, she'd safely guided a plane through one of the worst storms of the season. While other flights diverted, she'd maintained her cool, using her deep knowledge of weather patterns to find a smooth route through the turbulence. During crew meetings, she often noticed how some male colleagues would direct their technical questions to others, even though she had more experience on certain routes. She answered anyway, her expertise eventually forcing recognition. Small victories, day by day, flight by flight. The airline's chief mechanic became an unexpected ally. He'd noticed how she always stayed after flights to discuss maintenance details, genuinely interested in understanding every aspect of her aircraft. In 30 years, he said one day, while they inspected an engine together, "You're the only pilot who's asked me to explain the hydraulic system in detail." Her phone started ringing with requests from the scheduling office. "We have a challenging route," they'd say, or "There's bad weather coming." She became known as the pilot who could handle difficult situations with calm expertise. Other pilots began asking for her weather assessment before their own flights. One particularly memorable incident involved a medical emergency mid-flight. A passenger suffered a severe allergic reaction, requiring an immediate landing. She coordinated with air traffic control, found the nearest suitable airport, and landed in deteriorating weather conditions. The passenger's doctor later sent a letter of thanks, praising her quick thinking and steady hands. The incident made its way up to airline management. They started paying more attention to her flight records, her perfect safety scores, her ability to handle stress while maintaining fuel efficiency. Reviews that had once been routine became more detailed, more appreciative. In the crew room, she kept a small photo of her parents' dry cleaning shop. Some colleagues found it odd, but to her, it was a reminder of where she'd started. Every pressed shirt, every steamed dress had helped fund her dream. Now she pressed her own uniform, keeping her father's high standards. Her mother had finally stopped sending her job advertisements for medical positions, accepting that her daughter had found her true calling. Instead, she now sent news articles about developments in aviation, proudly sharing stories of her pilot daughter with shop customers. The younger flight attendants started coming to her for advice, especially the women trying to advance in their own careers. She remembered her early days, the sting of rejection, the weight of doubt. Keep a record of your successes, she'd tell them. On hard days, read them again. During one pre-flight check, she overheard two passengers discussing her through the open cockpit door. "Is it safe?" one whispered. "I've never had a woman pilot before." The other replied, "Check the airline's safety records. Some of their best pilots are women." She smiled, remembering a time when such support was rare. Her reputation caught the attention of private aviation companies. First came discreet emails, then direct phone calls. Elite Aviation, known for serving top executives and celebrities, seemed particularly interested. They'd heard about her weather expertise, her perfect safety record, her calm professionalism under pressure. The regional airlines director called her into his office. She expected complaints. There had been another incident with a demanding passenger. Instead, he handed her a letter of recommendation. "They're going to offer you a position," he said, referring to Elite Aviation. "You deserve it. But promise you'll remember us little guys when you're flying the big shots." That evening, looking out over the runway, she watched a sleek private jet take off, its lights piercing the dusk. Soon, she'd be in that cockpit, proving once again that excellence knows no gender. The path hadn't been easy, but every challenge had made her a better pilot and a stronger person. Would you like me to continue with part 6 of the story? The Elite Aviation interview was unlike anything she'd experienced before. The sleek corporate office overlooked a private airfield where multimillion-dollar jets gleamed in the sunlight. Inside, she faced a panel of executives who seemed more interested in her ability to handle difficult clients than her flight skills. "Tell us about the time you diverted during bad weather," one executive said, leaning forward. She told them about the medical supplies delivery, explaining her decision-making process, the calculations that went into finding a safe route. Their eyes lit up when she mentioned maintaining contact with the hospital to ensure the supplies arrived in time. Then came the simulator test. Elite's private jets were more sophisticated than anything she'd flown before. But aircraft were aircraft. She'd studied their manuals for weeks. The examiner threw everything at her: engine failures, hydraulic problems, extreme weather. She handled each challenge methodically, staying calm even when multiple systems failed at once. Most pilots rushed through emergency procedures, the examiner noted afterward. You stayed cool, kept communicating, and found solutions. That's exactly what we need with high-profile clients. His words carried weight. He'd been training private jet pilots for 20 years. The job offer came with conditions. She'd need to learn about wine selections, master the art of discreet service, and understand the particular needs of wealthy clients. "Our passengers aren't just paying for transportation," they explained. "They're paying for an experience." She thought of her parents' shop, how they'd always said customer service was about dignity and respect. Her first weeks at Elite were intense. She learned the preferences of regular clients, which CEO needed absolute quiet during flight, which celebrity required specific cabin temperatures. Every detail mattered. The jets themselves were masterpieces of engineering, with technology that made her previous planes look ancient. The breakthrough came during a particularly challenging flight. A tech industry leader needed to reach Silicon Valley urgently, but a massive storm system blocked the usual routes. Other pilots had declined the trip. She spent hours studying weather patterns, plotting alternative paths, and calculating fuel requirements. Not only did she get the client there safely, but she also managed to find smoother air by flying a creative route that added only minutes to the flight time. The client, impressed by both her skill and her detailed explanation of the route choice, requested her specifically for future flights. Word spread quickly in the private aviation community. Soon, her schedule filled with requests from executives who appreciated her combination of technical expertise and professional courtesy. She never name-dropped, never shared stories about her famous passengers. Her discretion became as valued as her flying skills. One day, while preparing for a flight, she overheard a conversation between two maintenance workers. "You know why they request her?" one asked. "Because she treats everyone the same. Doesn't matter if you're a billionaire or cleaning the plane." She smiled, remembering how her parents had always said dignity wasn't about wealth. The private aviation world had its own challenges. Some clients still did double takes when seeing her in the cockpit. But now she had something she hadn't had before, a reputation that preceded her. "Oh, you're the weather expert," they'd say, or "I heard about that flight through the storm." Elite's management noticed how she handled difficult situations. When a client made an inappropriate comment, she responded with such professional grace that they ended up apologizing. When bad weather threatened to delay important meetings, she found safe alternatives that kept schedules intact. During a quiet moment between flights, she visited her parents' shop. The familiar hiss of the steam press greeted her as she walked in, wearing her Elite aviation uniform. Her father paused his work, pride shining in his eyes. "My daughter," he said to a customer, "flies the big jets now." The customer looked at her with new respect, but she was still just her parents' daughter, shaped by their lessons in hard work and dignity. Would you like me to continue with part 7 of the story? The moment at LaGuardia's priority boarding gate played out differently this time. She stood there in her Elite aviation uniform, preparing to fly one of Silicon Valley's most influential tech CEOs across the country. The gate agent who had once dismissed her was now processing her credentials, eyes growing wider with each passing second. Behind her, she could hear whispers from the regular passengers. "That's her, the one who flew through that storm last month. I heard she's the best pilot Elite has." The gate agent's hands trembled slightly as she handed back the ID badge, her face flushed with recognition. The tech CEO arrived with his entourage, striding confidently toward the gate. He stopped short when he saw her, not with doubt, but with relief. "Glad you're our pilot today," he said, checking his watch. "We've got a tricky schedule, and I hear there's weather over the Rockies." She led the way to the private jet, a beautiful Gulfstream G650 worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. As she walked across the tarmac, she remembered all the times she'd watched planes from her parents' shop window. Now she was commanding one of the most sophisticated aircraft in the sky. The pre-flight check was interrupted by a commotion. Through the cockpit window, she could see the same gate agent hurrying across the tarmac, waving a folder. "I'm so sorry," the agent panted, reaching the plane. "You forgot your updated weather briefing." They both knew it was an excuse, a chance to make amends for past mistakes. Takeoff was smooth, the powerful engines lifting them effortlessly into the morning sky. As they climbed, Manhattan's skyline glittered below. Somewhere down there, her parents were probably just opening their shop, pressing the day's first suits, not knowing their daughter was flying above them. The real challenge came 3 hours into the flight. The weather system over the Rockies had intensified beyond forecasts. Other pilots were diverting hundreds of miles south, but she saw a narrow corridor of stable air, a path that would thread them through the storm safely. She got on the intercom, explaining the situation to her passengers with clear, confident words. The tech CEO listened intently as she outlined her plan. "I trust your judgment," he said simply, returning to his work. That trust, earned through reputation and skill, meant more than any credential. The next hour tested everything she'd learned in her career. The jet skirted massive storm clouds, riding wind currents she'd studied for years to understand. Through it all, her hands remained steady on the controls, her voice calm as she communicated with air traffic control. In the end, they landed in Silicon Valley not just safely, but ahead of schedule. The tech CEO emerged from the cabin looking impressed. "I've flown this route hundreds of times," he said, "but never this smoothly through weather like that. You'll be my pilot from now on." As she completed her post-flight checks, a young girl and her mother walked past the jet on a terminal tour. The girl stopped, pointing excitedly. "Look, Mom, a lady pilot." She waved to the child, remembering herself at that age, face pressed against airport windows, dreaming of this very moment. Back in the pilot's lounge, she overheard other pilots discussing the storm system she just navigated. "Who managed to get through that?" one asked. "Must have been luck." Another pilot answered, "No luck. That was the elite pilot everyone's talking about. She sees weather patterns the rest of us miss." That evening, she made a detour to her parents' shop. Her father was pressing a suit with the same care he always had. She told him about the flight, the storm, the CEO's praise. He nodded, smiling, then handed her a fresh pressed uniform for tomorrow. Some things never changed, and she was grateful for that. Would you like me to continue with part 8 of the story? Years at Elite Aviation brought new challenges and unexpected twists. The tech CEO's praise had spread through Silicon Valley's inner circles, and suddenly her schedule was filled with requests from the industry's biggest names. Each wanted the pilot who could find smooth air where others saw only storms. One memorable flight tested her skills like never before. They were halfway across the country when multiple warning lights flashed in the cockpit. A normal pilot might have panicked. This was a $45 million jet carrying some of tech's most valuable leaders. But she remembered her first instructor's words. "The aircraft is talking to you. Listen." She quickly identified the problem. A sensor malfunction was cascading through the jet's systems. Her countless hours studying the aircraft's mechanics with Elite's maintenance team paid off. She knew exactly which backup systems to engage, which warnings were real, and which were false alarms. The passengers never knew anything was wrong until after they landed safely. When she explained what had happened, one of them, a famous software developer, asked for a detailed explanation of how she'd handled the situation. "That's exactly how we approach debugging," he said, impressed. "Identify the root cause, not just the symptoms." Word of her technical knowledge spread. Soon, Elite's maintenance team was asking for her input during their routine checks. "She thinks like an engineer," they'd say. Her understanding of the aircraft went far beyond what most pilots knew, combining her natural curiosity with years of hands-on experience. The airline industry noticed. Aviation magazines wanted interviews, focusing not on her gender, but on her innovative approach to flight planning and weather analysis. Young pilots, both women and men, started reaching out for mentoring advice. She remembered her own early struggles and made time for each one. During a particularly busy week, she flew 4 different tech executives across the country. Each flight faced its own challenges: turbulent weather, tight schedules, complex routing. She handled them all with the same calm efficiency that had become her trademark. Between flights, she'd visit her parents' shop, now run by her younger cousin while her parents enjoyed semi-retirement. The familiar smell of steam and fabric softener always brought her back to earth. Success is good, her father would say, but remember where you started. She never forgot. A light aviation's management called her in for a meeting. She thought it might be about her busy schedule, but instead, they had a proposal. They wanted her to help develop their pilot training program. Your approach to flying is unique, they explained. We want others to learn from it. The training program became her passion project. She incorporated everything she'd learned, from handling difficult weather to managing complex technical issues. But most importantly, she emphasized the human element of flying. The sky doesn't care who you are, she'd tell her students. It only cares what you can do. One day, during a training session, she noticed a young Asian girl watching through the classroom window. The girl's mother, embarrassed, tried to hurry her along, but she stepped out to talk to them. The girl's eyes lit up when she explained the simulator behind her. Can girls really fly these big planes? The child asked. They can fly anything, she answered, remembering her own childhood dreams. Her reputation grew beyond private aviation. Commercial airlines started consulting her about their weather routing protocols. Her methods for finding smooth air through storm systems became case studies in flight schools. The same schools that had once doubted her now used her career as an example of excellence. At the end of a long day of training and flying, she sat in the cockpit of her parked jet, looking out over the runway lights. A line of planes took off into the darkening sky, each one carrying its own dreams and destinations. She thought about her journey, from the little girl in her parents' shop to the pilot others now looked up to. Would you like me to continue with the final part 9, of the story? Years later, the view from Elite Aviation's Chief Training Officer's office offered a perfect view of the runways. She'd come full circle, from watching planes take off from her parents' shop window to overseeing the training of a new generation of pilots. But the most significant changes weren't visible from any window. The flight academy she developed became known for its innovative approach. Everyone has a different path to the sky, she'd tell her students. Her training program didn't just teach flying. It taught understanding. Understanding weather, understanding aircraft, understanding people. Just as her parents had taught her that every wrinkled suit had a story, she taught that every flight had its unique challenges. One morning, she spotted a familiar face in the hallway, the gate agent from that day at LaGuardia, now working as a ground operations coordinator. They both smiled, remembering their first encounter. You changed how I see things, the agent admitted during their coffee break. Now I look at capabilities, not assumptions. Her parents' shop had become something of a legend among the aviation community. Pilots would visit just to see where her journey began. Her father, now retired but still pressing his own shirts with meticulous care, would share stories about his daughter's determination. Her mother would show visitors the corner where her daughter used to study flight manuals. The training program's success caught the industry's attention. Other airlines started sending their pilots for specialized courses. Each class was diverse, men and women from all backgrounds, each bringing their own dreams to the sky. She made sure every student knew that excellence was the only measure that mattered. Her office wall held a special photo, the model airplane that once hung in her bedroom, now displayed next to her many awards and recognitions. But her most prized possession was a simple logbook, its pages yellow with age, containing her first flight entries. She showed it to every new class, proof that dreams take flight one page at a time. The aviation industry was changing. More women were entering flight schools, more diverse faces in cockpits. When asked about her role in this change, she'd smile and say, I just flew planes. The sky did the rest. But everyone knew her impact went far beyond flying. One day, while reviewing training files, she received an unusual request. A group of young girls from her old neighborhood wanted to tour the facility. Their science teacher had told them about the local girl who became a celebrated pilot. She cleared her schedule immediately. During the tour, one girl asked about the hardest part of becoming a pilot. She thought about all the challenges, the doubts, the rejections, the long hours. The hardest part, she said finally, is believing in yourself when others don't. But once you're in the air, none of that matters. Up there, you're free. Her legacy wasn't just in the flights she commanded or the storms she'd navigated. It was in the changed minds, the open doors, the lifted spirits. Each time a doubtful parent saw their daughter's dreams differently, each time a gate agent checked their assumptions, each time a young person realized their dreams were possible, that was her true achievement. As the sun set over the runway, she watched a young pilot she trained complete her first solo flight in a private jet. The landing was perfect, smooth, confident, professional. In that moment, she saw her own journey come full circle. The sky had never cared who she was, only what she could do. Now, thanks to her path and those who would follow it, many more would have the chance to prove what they could do too. The end of her story was really just the beginning for countless others. Each sunrise brought new pilots, new dreams, new possibilities. And somewhere, perhaps in another small shop or quiet neighborhood, another child was looking up at the sky, daring to dream of wings.